Well, I hope you had a great New Year's Day. Hope you had a great New Year's weekend. Um, it the way the holidays worked out with Christmas on a Sunday and New Year's on a Sunday, and then federal holidays were the next day, so we had back-to-back short weeks, which worked out great. It worked out great. A lot of people got to spend time with family and friends. I know there's a lot of travel that went on, and that's a good thing. It's important. It's important for us to spend time together. It's important for us to get around a table and to celebrate the many ways that we're blessed. And so it was a good thing. It was a great thing. The lesson today is arguably one of the most commonly known stories out of the Bible. I mean, if I ask you to share a Bible story, in fact, if I just randomly went out in the grocery store line and said, hey, tell me one Bible story you can remember, I would say that the story of the prodigal son, which is what it's commonly known as, maybe the story of the Good Samaritan, but arguably the prodigal son is one of the most familiar stories. It's a story that people that maybe even haven't been to church very much, they know that story because it's been shared over and over and over again. It comes from Luke 15, 11 through 32, and the title of our lesson today is Grace and Assurance for All. The purpose statement is to affirm that we are never out of the reach of the grace of God. And it's like so many stories, and we say this often in the Bible, that we look at them, we know them. In fact, this particular story, you could share just off the top of your head most of the story and what it's about. But we're going to look a little bit deeper, as we often do with a Sunday school lesson. It's important to do that. And it's important to look at it in terms of how does it relate to us, which I say that often. In terms of context, Jesus during this period of time was being chastised by the keepers of the law, the Pharisees. They were mad. They were mad because Jesus spent time with tax collectors, with sinners. He was spending time with people that were marginalized on the edge of society. And he shared three parables, the prodigal son being one, the story of the lost coin being another, and the story of the lost sheep. And the purpose was to share that it's important that when somebody has drifted away from the church, when somebody is far removed from the church, it's important we bring them back to the church, that we bring them back into the fold. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. As I say, the lesson comes from Luke 15 and begins at Luke 15:11. I'm going to read it. As I say, it's a familiar story to you. Jesus said, a certain man had two sons. The younger son said to his father, Father, give me my share of the inheritance. Then the father divided his estate between them. Soon afterward, the younger son gathered everything together and took a trip to a land far away. There he wasted his wealth through extravagant living. When he had used up his resources, a severe food shortage arose in that country, and he began to be in need. He hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. He longed to eat his fill from what the pigs ate, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, How many of my father's hired hands have more than enough food? But I'm starving to death. I will get up and go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Take me on as one of your hired hands. So he got up and went to his father. Now while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with compassion. His father ran to him, hugged him, and kissed him. Then his son said, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Fetch the fattened calf and slaughter it. We must celebrate with feasting, because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field. And coming in from the field, he approached the house and heard music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked what was going on, and the servant replied, Your brother has arrived, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf, because he received his son back safe and sound. Then the older son was furious and didn't want to enter in, but his father came out and begged him. He answered his father, Look, I've served you all these years, and I never disobeyed your instruction. Yet you've never given me as much as a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours returned, after gobbling up your estate on prostitutes, you slaughtered the fattened calf for him." Then his father said, "Son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." As I say, a familiar story, but let's look a little bit more into the story. Let's look into the story and start to reflect on how this reflects on us and how we might fit into the story. Now, first of all, it has probably been called the greatest story that's ever been shared in the Bible. Under Jewish law, a father was not free to do what he wanted to do with his inheritance. And we can read this in Deuteronomy. The elder son would get 2/3, and the younger son would get 1/3. And it was not unusual for a father to distribute his estate before he died. And in fact, he often did that because he said, "I want you to take care of things, and so I'm going to go ahead and give you the estate to take care of." But when we look at this story, we look at the callousness, really, of the younger son and the way that he approaches his dad. He obviously saw something that enticed him. He saw something in a foreign land. I mean, how many times in our lives have we looked at something else? We've looked at somebody else's house, we've looked at somebody's car, we looked at somebody's job, and it seemed like a better situation than we had. That okay, I'm really not happy here, but over there I'm going to be really happy. If I could just move to that neighborhood or move to that town or get that job or whatever. And that's kind of the way that we get the impression that the younger son went to his father and he said, "I want something else. I see something else out there that I want, so give me my inheritance so I can go get it." And he said, "Give me part of the estate, and I will leave." And the father didn't argue. He gave him that part of the estate. But we also read that he soon ran through that money, and he ended up feeding pigs. Now, that was a task that was forbidden under Jewish law. We know that. I mean, the Jewish law said that cursed is he who feeds swine. And then, as we look at that story, the son started to feel guilty. He started to realize what mistake he had made. He said, "I've done wrong. When I look at me, I'm hungry, I'm starving. I mean, my father's servants at least get a meal to eat. I need to go back. I need to ask for forgiveness from my father and just ask to be hired as one of his servants, as one of his hired hands." And so, as he gets ready to do that, he decided to come home. He decided to plead to be taken back. And look at what happens. The father sees him from way off. Now, sometimes we pass over that, and that just becomes another sentence in the story. But think about how important that is. The message here is that the father was constantly looking for his son. He must have been he didn't know he was coming home. Remember, they didn't have internet, they didn't have TV, they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have newspapers. And so he didn't know. He was looking for his son. He was searching for his son because his son was lost. He loved his son, and he wanted him to come home. And immediately the father says, "Get the robe, get the ring." The robe stands for honor. Give him, I'm pleased that he's back. The ring was a statement of authority. I mean, if you gave somebody your signet ring, you were basically giving them power of attorney over your affairs. The shoes I thought were interesting, and I read a couple of commentaries about that. That shoes were not something that a slave wore. And I never thought about that before, but then I was reminded in a couple of things I read about the Negro spiritual that says all God's children got shoes, because shoes were a sign of freedom. If a slave didn't have shoes, they couldn't run away. And so he said, get him his sandals. And then he created this feast. He said, let's have a feast, let's have a celebration, let's rejoice, because he's home. Now, I read a couple of commentaries, and again, I refer often back to Barclay. And Barclay argues that he said it should never have been called the parable of the prodigal son. For the son is not a hero. It should be called the parable of the loving father, for it tells us rather about a father's love than a son's sin. It tells us a lot about the forgiveness of God. I mean, as I mentioned before, the father must have been waiting. He must have been watching for his son to come home. He didn't know if he was going to come home or not. But his heart ached. I think about God. When people drift away from the church, when people they're troubled, they're distressed, they're challenged with life, and I think about God's heart, God's wanting them to come home. He's got the answer. Just come home to me. And then he forgave him. He didn't chastise him. He didn't do anything. He forgave him. There were no recriminations involved. If we think about forgiving, and I think it's an important thing for us to consider as people of faith, it's so easy. First of all, it's not easy to forgive. Let's just start there. But it's so easy if we do forgive that we want to put conditions on it. Well, I'm going to forgive you, but only if you do this. Or only if you promise to me never to do that, and I'm going to keep reminding you about that promise because I don't want you to forget the fact that I forgave you. But that's not what we see here. I think so many times we want to do that. Okay, I'm going to forgive you. It's not going to be easy for me to forgive you, but by golly, I'm not going to forget it either. I'll forgive you, but I'm not forgetting. And I don't want you to forget. But that's not what forgiveness is. That's not what this passage tells us. That's not what Jesus spoke to the people when he told this story. He forgave. It wasn't done as a favor. He forgave him and he put it behind him and he moved on. It's an incredible thing when we think about God doing that for us. I think about things I've done in my life. I think about things that I'm not happy with. I think about things that I'm disappointed with myself, and I know I disappointed God. I disappointed other people. And I think one of the things, the fact that I remember those times, it's not intended to be punishment, but it is intended to remind me, and that's okay. But that's not the end of the story. Then comes along his older brother. And he was actually sorry that his brother had come home. I mean, in this story, he stands for the self-righteous Pharisees who would rather see a sinner destroyed than saved. He didn't want him to come home. He wanted him punished if he came home. His attitude shows that his years of obedience to his father had been years of duty and not of loving service. He makes it very clear that I served you. He said it in a way that was angry. I didn't do it because I served you, because I love you, because I respect you, because I want to honor you. I did it out of duty. And his attitude is one of a lack of sympathy. He refers to the prodigal, to his brother, not as his brother. In the story, in the passage, he looks at his dad and he said, "That son of yours." He doesn't say my brother. That son of yours. He had this self-righteous attitude about him, that he would rather have kicked him down the road than helped him up when he was down. And it was also interesting when he talks about the fact that he said, "My brother wasted money on prostitutes, on extravagant living." There was never any mention in the story before that about prostitutes. And yet the brother brought it up, and again, Barclay made the comment, and I thought it was an interesting comment. He said he probably brought it up and used that because he wished he had done that. And the fact that he was dutiful, he didn't, but he didn't perform the duties that he did because he wanted to. He just felt a sense of obligation to do it, but he really wished he had been with his brother. And so he in his own mind, he was sinning. So as we look at this story, as we look at this passage, that we see that God has his arms open to us. He has love for us that we can't even imagine. God is pursuing each and every person. We're all part of his creation. The love of God is far broader than any love that we can share with somebody. We can't comprehend it all. God will forgive people, and all they have to do is ask to be forgiven. I'm reminded of a story of somebody I knew well. We were in a group setting, and that person got up. It was a devotional. It was back in my NASCAR days, and we always had church. We always had a time, a chapel service. We would get together before every race, and there was somebody that stood up and he said, you know, he said, there was a time in my life where alcohol was an important entertainment for me. He said, I was not faithful to my wife. And we're all kind of sitting there looking and listening to him and thinking, oh my gosh, where are we going with this? But he said, I came to the realization one day that if I prayed to God, He would forgive me and I could put all that behind me. He didn't ask me to do anything. He didn't ask me to clean up. He didn't ask me to go to a bunch of church services. He didn't ask me to do anything, just to say, Lord, I love you and I want you in my life. It was a powerful moment. I've never been able to get it out of my mind, because it's so true that when you come to that realization in your life, that when you come to the realization that all you have to do is say, Lord, I want you in my life, God will forgive you, and your life will never be the same since. Will you pray with me, my friends? Our gracious Heavenly Father, we do. We thank you so much for this grace that you share with us. This grace that you want us to share that story with other people. And as we go throughout this week, we know that you're going to introduce us to people where we have that opportunity to share our faith. And we keep our eyes open to those things you want us to see, our ears open to the things you want us to hear, and our hearts overflowing with the love that you have put in each and every one of us. In His name we pray. Amen. I love you, my friends, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.